Thank you for joining today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session, Helping Learners Succeed, Strategies to Foster Self-Regulated Learning. Our presenter today is Dr. Kim McLeod, who is an instructional designer and evaluation data specialist with ETI. Here are our goals for today's session.
To help us get us started here and introduced to what self-regulated learning is, we're going to look at an example of a learner, Alex, who had a concerning exam score. So let's take a look at some characteristics of our learner here. The first thing to note is that a faculty member had asked Alex, after having a poor performance on an exam, about his exam preparation and study. And Alex said, "Oh, I'm just kind of winging it each time." The faculty member also noted that Alex did not really seem to interact with his peers. He didn't really seem to raise his hand to ask questions, ever seek out the faculty member's advice or help. And then the faculty member also kind of overheard a conversation between some of the learners in their class who were discussing their scores on a recent exam. And the faculty member overheard Alex say something like, the professor just made all the tests too hard this year. We have all probably had learners that are coming to mind when we hear about the characteristics of our learner Alex here. We might not have an exact case study of Alex, but for me at least, I know there are a couple learners that are coming to mind from my history as an instructor and a teacher. We can say that for this course that Alex was being observed in, that the faculty member took note of, Alex is not a self-regulated learner. Take a look at some of these points after we have some review and talk more about what that means to be or not be a self-regulated learner. Today's topic is self-regulated learning, and it really does provide us with a framework where we can support learners who are like Alex, who are maybe struggling because of their own management of their work and their time. Self-regulated learning, or you're going to hear me today just call it SRL a lot, is an individual process. It's something that learners engage with on their own, but we're here to talk about it together today because, first of all, I want you to be able to identify learners that maybe are or are not self-regulated. Also, there's really some specific design decisions that you can make for your assignments or your tasks, whether you're in the classroom or the clinic, that can facilitate or encourage your learners to be more self-regulated. That will be our focus today, is what can we do about self-regulation? So now that we've gotten a little intro, visiting in with our case study of Alex, let's discuss the definition of self-regulated learning a little more carefully. I invite you to consider this analogy of a maze. Really think of it like any learning activity, might be like a maze. SRL is a set of skills that can help us with navigating through the maze, planning beforehand, actually navigating while we're in it, and then reflecting back afterward. So we're going to talk more about this analogy of the maze as we visit each of the three phases today. So let's take a look at our definition and a model of SRL. Here we have Zimmerman's definition of self-regulated learning, that is the self-generated thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are oriented at attaining goals. And you're going to hear me repeat these three words over and over again today: thoughts, feelings, and behaviors or actions, because that is what's key here, is it's what learners are thinking and feeling and doing. Self-regulation is truly that self-awareness that learners have about the goals that they need to achieve and how they actually need to do them, what strategies they need to put into place. Self-regulation is certainly task-specific. It depends on a wide variety of factors. We'll talk about many of them today. It could depend on a learner's interest in the task, the environment that they're in. Day-to-day self-regulation can even vary. I think back to learners that I've had before where I might have had a wildly different experience with them from my colleagues. If I'm talking to a colleague about a learner, I might be commenting about how they're so engaged, they ask great questions, and my colleague is like bewildered. Like, that is not the experience that I have with this learner. And likely, at least part of that is due to self-regulation and all of the different things that impact it. So that's going to be our focus for today. You may or may not be wondering at this point, well, my role is to teach a clinical skill, academic skill, build academic knowledge. What does any of this have to do with my job? How is self-regulated learning relevant for me? And the answer is that self-regulated learning, or SRL, is supportive of successful outcomes regardless of the setting. So if our learners can become more self-regulated, this can then be impactful in the clinic, in the classroom, in their performance on whatever skill they're building here at USU or beyond. There is truly an abundant amount of evidence supporting SRL and its role in successful outcomes. This has been found in athletics. So, like athletes that are more able to self-regulate are more successful in their sport. Those with chronic illnesses who are taught and are able to self-manage their chronic illnesses have better health outcomes. And then, of course, in academics, this has been found from all the way PK to higher ed, and in our setting here of health sciences education. So truly the evidence points to those who are self-regulated are more successful. And so that is why we're looking at it a little more closer today. Learners really will come to us with a variety of self-regulated learning skills, a variety of capabilities. So just as we are working to build their academic skills and their clinical skills, if we can also provide them some explicit instruction in SRL, it can improve on and fill those gaps to benefit them in your setting and beyond as they go into the field, into practice, wherever it might be. I'll share now the model of self-regulated learning that we'll look at from Zimmerman's perspective. The first part of self-regulated learning is the forethought phase. These are all of the thoughts, feelings, actions, there are those three words, that learners have before they're engaging in a task. Then we have the performance phase. These are all the thoughts, feelings, and actions that learners are having as they're actually engaging in a task, trying to accomplish whatever goal they've set out to accomplish. Then we have the self-reflection phase. These are the thoughts, feelings, and actions that our learners are having after they've either successfully or not completed a task. And then really key here to self-regulation and this model of SRL is that it is iterative. So it doesn't just stop there after the completion of a task. It becomes the task of the person to think back and decide, how did it go when I did this task last time? What lesson can I learn from it? This means that learners who are self-regulated are not just thinking back to the last time they took a test or gave a presentation or tried a skill. They're thinking back to 2 times ago, 3 times ago, really their whole body of experience to constantly become more self-regulated, constantly become better at regulating their actions. So you did just hear it stated that self-regulated learning is a very personal process. It's very independent, and that learners are doing it to different extent across different tasks and subject areas. And that's true. It is independent, but it's really through interactions that self-regulated learning grows and develops. So it's interactions with learners' environment, learners' materials, the materials that you provide for them and that they access, interactions with peers, interactions with you. This is how learners note and grow from their experiences. So sure, you cannot force your learners to self-regulate, but you can really purposefully design your tasks and your assignments in a way that they facilitate interactions that are supportive of SRL processes. And so throughout our time today, we'll talk about what are those design moves that you can make in your assignments and your tasks to facilitate self-regulated learning. I'll also point out here that if you have struggling learners and you've already built in some of these self-regulated learning enhancing aspects to your assignments, you can point struggling learners to these pieces that you've created. So rather than having to kind of troubleshoot each time you notice a learner struggling, if you've already got these built-in elements, you can just direct them to these elements to help them. We're going to go over many processes, many ideas. So I invite you to, as you're listening, just consider how you might add in maybe just one or a couple of these ideas when you're designing your tasks and your assignments. Let's move in now to the first phase of SRL. This is the forethought phase. Continuing on with our analogy of the maze, these are all of the thoughts and feelings and actions that are happening prior to stepping into a maze. So if you think about maybe setting a goal, like, oh, I want to get to the center of the maze, maybe making a plan for how to get there, deciding how much you care about using this maze in general. So everything that's happening before actually entering into the maze. Let's define the forethought phase a little bit more, and then talk about ways that you can design your instruction to facilitate this phase for learners. Within the forethought phase, there are 2 main groups of processes. So the thoughts, feelings, and actions that our learners engage in this phase to different degrees. We have task analysis processes and self-motivational beliefs. So within task analysis, we have goal setting. This is where learners simply decide what it is they want to achieve. They set a goal. And then we have strategic planning. This is where learners think through, well, if that's my goal, what are all the different strategies I need to put in place to accomplish that goal? And we'll talk about what I mean by that term strategies in the next phase. It's where they're basically matching up, what do I need to do to get to my goal? Then within self-motivational beliefs, learners are taking stake of their self-efficacy. This is where learners consider, that's my goal. To what extent do I truly believe that I can accomplish this goal, that I can accomplish this task and be successful? It's different than like a broad statement of confidence. I'm a confident student, I'm a confident clinician. It's more so specific to the task. How confident are they in that they can achieve this particular goal? Next up, and this one likely happens like immediately when a learner gets a task or gets an assignment, is they immediately have a reaction about their interest or how much they value the task. So learners likely will immediately be like, oh, I'm not excited about this, or this is something I care about, and this really can have an impact on their next steps. How much are they going to engage? How much effort will they put into it? Next up is outcome expectations. And this is where learners consider the long-term implications for their success or their lack of success on a particular task. If I'm successful in performing this clinical skill, what will it lead to in the future? What will what will my instructor think of me if I don't do well on this, or if I do well? What will the implication be for my future career? So they're taking stake more of long-term, how is the outcome going to impact them? And then lastly is goal orientation. And this is where learners consider, I set my goal, but why? Why did I set my goal? And they might not even consciously do this. Research says that if people have mastery goal orientations, that has the best outcome. What I mean by that is mastery goal orientation means, are they doing it for the sake of growing, becoming a better student, a better future practitioner? What is their reasoning for doing it? Or maybe is their orientation something like, I want to do well on this skill because I do not want to look silly in front of my peers when I am doing it in front of them. Or maybe I want to do well because I just want to do better than everyone in this class because I'm a competitive person. There are a variety of goal orientations, but that mastery orientation is truly the one that has the best outcomes. Okay, lots of processes that we just talked about. So the question is, how can I encourage this type of thinking and these type of actions and feelings in my learners? The first thing that you can do is to encourage your learners to set very specific goals prior to engaging in a task or an assignment. This can be as simple as you just posing the question or asking your learners, what is your goal for this task that I've just given you? You might provide them with a rubric and then ask them in the rubric to indicate where they hope to perform across each of the different levels of the rubric. So they might be naming something specific that they want to do. You might even name for them, there might not be flexibility here. You might name for them, this is your goal, right? This is what you need to do to be proficient at this. But even just naming and specifically saying what a goal is can help our learners regulate. Next up is to make a plan. You can provide learners with a graphic organizer or a checklist that breaks down all of the different steps they're going to need to accomplish to get to the goal that you have for them. This graphic organizer approach can be really useful because it takes the work out of your learners having to do this themselves and instead tells them, well, here's what you're going to need to do so they can just focus on doing it. You can also add in there a column that asks them to name like due dates for each of these steps. If you're not telling them due dates for each step, they can decide that for themselves to manage themselves. They also might name specific strategies that they want to use to accomplish each step. Again, we'll talk about what I mean by strategies in the next phase here. The next thing that you can do, and I acknowledge that this is possible to different extents for each of us, but you can incorporate choice. This might be something that you are like, oh, I could really do that, right? I could let my learners choose for the projects. Maybe at the end of the course, they can do a paper or a presentation. Maybe you can provide a lot of choice, but maybe you can't really provide much choice. Like maybe you can just say everyone needs an empirical article and the choice is you get to choose which article. Or maybe even narrower, here are 3 empirical articles, you get to choose which one, right? That gives you even more control while still providing that choice for your learners. Anytime you can incorporate it, it really gets to that interest that I was talking about. This point, you also should really be tapping into your learner's previous experiences. This is the time to do it. We saw in the model of self-regulation that it is iterative. There is that arrow going from the self-reflection phase back up to the forethought phase, showing that learners should be tapping into previous experiences when they take on a task. So at this point, if you can even just probe your learners, what have you done previously that worked or didn't work? You might do that independently. You might have them turn and talk to each other. You might even open it up for a group discussion so that learners can learn from each other's experiences too. And then lastly, I encourage you to find some way to share with your learners the why behind your task that you're assigning. What is it? What is the broader implication? What is the purpose that this will serve to them in their future? I find that anecdotes are a really good way to provide this for your learners. If you have a story from a deployment, a story from an experience with a patient, can you give them some kind of story that will make this skill relevant for them? Can you think of a colleague story? And honestly, can you even just make up a plausible story that gives your learners a reason why, oh, this isn't just something I'm learning in a classroom. This isn't just an isolated skill. This really has meaning for the future and for what I'm going to be doing one day. And now we'll dive into the second phase of self-regulated learning, the performance phase. In the performance phase, if we continue on with our maze analogy, if you'll humor me, now the performance phase is where you're actually in the maze. You're actually like going through the turns and twists, trying to get to that goal of getting to the center of the maze. You're trying to learn from your lessons. This worked last time, this didn't. You're kind of course correcting as you go through. So let's define the performance phase a little bit more and then review some of the ways that you can design your instruction to facilitate this phase of thinking for your learners. In the performance phase, there are two main groups of processes, self-control processes and self-observation processes. So again, thoughts, feelings, and actions that learners might engage in during this phase. So within the self-control processes, we have first task strategies. And I like to think of these like specific ways that we can provide for learners, like tricks for learning certain content. So if we think about like the formula for the circumference of a circle, right? It's like a very specific trick we can give our learners that will help them remember it. If you think about maybe mnemonic devices to remember the order of a certain set of bones or a certain set of muscles, a visual that you can provide. Maybe there's you always visualize it like a triangle, and you can tell them and draw out your triangle for them to show that thinking. These can be tricks that you picked up in your own school. They can be tricks that you picked up in your work from colleagues. They can be things that you just kind of come up with. Oh, this would be a good way to remember it. Any little trick, honestly, you would be surprised the smallest things will stick in our learners' minds. So any trick you can provide is a good way to encourage task strategies for our learners. The next group of strategies is called regulatory strategies. These are different from task strategies. They are not task specific. They are much broader and can be applied no matter the task. So the first one is called self-instruction. This is kind of that like classic study scenario that you think about where someone's just sitting down, reteaching themselves the material. Next up, we have imagery. This is, pretty self-explanatory. They're kind of sitting and visualizing themselves being successful at the task. Next up, we have time management. This is where learners are kind of parsing out the time that they have. They know this is their due date at the end. So this is, figuring out how much time they can dedicate to each part. After that, we have environmental structuring. This is where our learners set up their space, hopefully, to be successful, right? Maybe they choose to work in their own apartment rather than their significant others, right? Because that's going to be a more successful setting. Maybe they have out all of the books they need so they don't have to keep running to different places to get them. We also have to think about environmental being digital. So closing out all the extraneous tabs so you only have what's open to be able to focus, or putting your phone in do not disturb mode so that doesn't become an interruption to your plan here. Next up is help seeking. Again, pretty self-explanatory. This is where learners are finding help sources to get them what they need, whether it's people or other resources like websites to help them succeed and learn more. The next regulatory strategy is interest incentives. And this is where learners strive to build interest in something, maybe even if they don't have it, they find a way to make it relevant. I think about in my own experience, if there's ever been a topic that I'm learning about that I'm like, this is not really my thing, or I'm not really into this, I might go to like the Wikipedia page and like read the 3 paragraph history of the topic just to get myself a little bit more hooked into, why is this relevant, or who are the relevant people that have, used this method or whatever it might be. This is something that learners might do on their own, but we can also encourage this through some approaches we'll talk about. Lastly, we have self-consequences, and this is where our learners may gamify their process to be able to build in rewards or consequences. This is that like classic, like, oh, I can, get up and grab a second cup of coffee at this point. Or if I read this number of pages, I'm going to go take a walk around to give myself a mental break. So they find ways to build in kind of that gaming aspect to get themselves continual motivation. And then the second set of processes are called self-observation processes. There are just 2 of these. So the first is called metacognitive monitoring. This is kind of a mentally taking stake or noticing how things are going. It's more informal. Learners are just kind of thinking in their head, oh, that worked, that didn't work. Oh, I need to do this. They're kind of mentally taking stock of how things are going and trying to adjust as they internally keep track of things. And then we have self-recording. That is a much more formal process where learners are, on paper or maybe in the Notes app or a digital space like a Google Doc. They're tracking and being more careful to note what is or isn't working. They're implementing different strategies and saying if it works or not. They're graphing the amount of time they spend on different parts of the task. So it's like a more formalized version of metacognitive monitoring. Okay, so once again, many strategies, many different processes that we just talked about. How can I actually impact my learners here? What can I actually do to support my learners? And the biggest thing that I recommend for the performance phase is to almost play matchmaker for your learners. Match strategies to the tasks that you are giving. You can make it easier for your learners to use their strategies if you just tell them what strategies are going to be most helpful or what you think might fit. So let me give you some examples of that. If you can identify specific help sources for your learners, like if there's a great website or a professor that makes videos on a topic, if you can identify that for your learners, then they can just go straight to using them. In my graduate school experience, I had my first quantitative class. I also did full-time work, so I did all my homework on the weekends. So I always had to kind of relearn or remind myself what we did in class. And I oftentimes spent so much time on the weekends just like finding YouTube videos that would help with that instruction and that used the same approaches that we did in class. And so then for my second quantitative course, the professor actually put in the syllabus a specific YouTube channel. And they said, this isn't me, but this is someone that is in the same field of study. It's someone that uses the same statistical software. So as you're working, you can visit this channel and find relevant videos. Then I was spending my weekends, instead of trying to find resources to help me, I was really just focusing my time on actually getting the help, watching the videos, doing my work instead of all the searching. And that is huge for learners. If you can take away some of that work of finding the strategy, finding the help source, and just give them the help source. Another example is that you can model for your learners what it looks like to visualize success on the task. This might work really well in a clinical skill. I think if you watched the Olympics over the past couple weeks, athletes do this all the time. You might do this as well already yourself, where you just kind of picture yourself doing the skill successfully. But this could also apply like doing a presentation successfully, taking a test successfully. Visualizing something that might not come inherently to our learners. But if you model that for them, if you say, take a moment, picture yourself being successful at this, maybe you give them like a bit of a script, to have them follow the first time. Then when they're studying, when they're preparing, when they're sitting on the metro commuting in, they might even be visualizing and doing that as well, because you've just kind of reminded them that that's a great way to prepare for this task. And lastly, another great strategy that you can match to some of your tasks is to create some kind of study guide or outline that can help your learners as they engage in self-instruction. So rather than, say an exam coming up has, a certain number of chapters on it, that's a lot of information. If you can be really specific, like these specific topics within these chapters, these specific parts of the chapters, these review questions that cover these chapters are going to be really relevant. Anything that you can give them, it's not cheating, right? It's like giving them a more specific direction so that, again, they're using that time more efficiently to do the studying of what's necessary rather than, trying to self-instruct. And then the second thing that you might be able to do for your learners to support this kind of thinking is to develop some kind of template where learners can do that self-recording that I had mentioned. So where they can track their own progress, where they can look at all the different parts of their plan and decide, what strategy do I need to do, what works, what doesn't. If you made a table for them in that first phase, I had suggested, maybe make a table for them that gives them their goal and parts of the goal. They can fill in strategies into this table too, and then they can make note, like, this strategy didn't work, or, they can keep track of their time and they can maybe make note. Oh, I took 30 minutes on this instead of 25 or instead of 15, so now I need to adjust my time. It helps to hold them accountable. And again, now they're not creating their own chart, their own table, their own space. You've just created it for them. So the third phase is self-reflection. And in this phase, if we again think about our maze analogy, this is where, you've gotten through the maze. Maybe you were successful, maybe you found your way to the middle, maybe you never did, but you're walking out of the maze, you're walking back to your car, driving home, and it's all of the thoughts, feelings, and actions that are happening during these times. How did it go? How are you feeling? What are the things that you're thinking about for next time? So let's go in and define this phase a little bit more. There are two main groups of processes in the self-reflection phase, self-judgment and self-reaction. Within self-judgment, we have self-evaluation, and this is where our learners are comparing their performance, how they did, to some kind of standard. They might compare their performance to the goal that they had set. How did I do? What was my goal? How did I actually do? They might compare their performance to their peers. They might observe their peers' performance or ask about it and see how they did in comparison. They might also have some kind of example of mastery or, an A plus, or whatever it might be in your context and compare themselves to that. We have causal attributions, and this is where our learners think about, what was it that caused them to get the outcome that they did? This could be really fixed. Like they could say something like, well, I didn't do well because anatomy is just not my thing. It's just not my subject area. That's pretty fixed, right? Like there's nothing you can do. If you truly believe it's not your thing, well, that's pretty fixed. It could be something variable, though. Our learners might say something, especially if they're very self-regulated. They might say something like, I didn't do well, and it was because I ended up having to cut my studying for this subject short to think about, because I had to do, three other things, and I just wasn't able to dedicate the time to it. That's more variable, right? In the future, they could do something about that. Next up in the self-reaction processes, we have adaptive and defensive decisions. And this hooks on to those causal attributions. So it's like the so what after they make an attribution. So if they say something like, anatomy is just not my subject, it's just not my thing. A defensive decision might be something like, and so I'm not going to do anything. I can't change anything anyway, right? That's pretty defensive. They're like not really doing anything to make a change. But they might instead say something like, oh, anatomy is not my thing. Maybe they could be more adaptive, like, and so I think I need to do some additional work outside of class. I need to identify another book that will help me. I need to identify another resource that I can seek out or a person I could speak to. Adaptive versus defensive decisions are basically the what's next? What am I going to do about my performance the next time? And then lastly, we have self-satisfaction or affect. This is something that happens likely without learners even, meaning it to. It's their immediate reaction to their result. Their immediate kind of like, oh, gut reaction. Like, did it go well? Did it not? How do they feel about it? Are they feeling good about how they did? Are they not feeling so great? Are they proud of their work? It's that immediate reaction, their affect following the result and learning how they did. So again, let's think about what we can do actually for our learners to get them engaging in this type of thinking and feeling and action. The first thing that you can do that's really helpful at this phase is to give your learners something by which they can self-evaluate. So I said with self-evaluation, learners are comparing their result, their performance to some kind of standard. And if you provide for them that example that they're going to self-evaluate with, it can be very helpful because you know that learners are comparing their performance to something that's actually what you wanted from them. They can look at your example. You might even be able to name something specific. Like if you notice everyone struggled with one particular subject area, maybe you provide for them an example that is very strong in that area. And you tell them, I really want you to specifically look at how you did on this compared to this example. So you can provide for your learners that example by which they are self-evaluating. And the next thing that you can do, and I will admit, this is the hardest one, at least for me. I find it is with a lot of educators that I've worked with before. You can provide for your learners reflection time. It sounds very easy, right? Build in 5 minutes to reflect on what you did. Build in 5 minutes for your learners to reflect. But it is oftentimes the first thing that goes when we are strapped for time, which is always, as we know. So I encourage you to really be intentional about whatever you do. See if you can build in time for reflection. This might be as simple as like blocking off 5 minutes and you just ask your learners to sit and reflect, maybe write something, maybe talk to someone near them. You might have them share out as a whole group. You might also have this be something more formal, but ask them to consider to make those attributions. What led to your result? What strategies did you put in place? What did you do to get yourself here? And then make some decisions. What are you going to do next time to either continue on with this, success, or maybe to make some changes? Again, very easy said, very much more difficult to actually do it. I understand that, but even just like I said, 5 minutes can be so valuable to make that process iterative. So, our goals today were to define self regulated learning and then go through each of those phases and identify some strategies that learners can be supported with and assisted with in each. So, as we wrap up today, some major conclusions, just some reminders. First off, that learners will come to us with varying self regulated learning skills. It will vary depending on many different factors, as we've heard today. Some learners will be very good at self regulating, some not so much, and lots in between. And that, like anything else, self regulated learning skills really do differ by the task or the subject or the environment. So, what can faculty do? You yourself can self regulate. Think back to the last time you did something, what worked, what didn't, how did it go? How did I feel about how it went? And what changes can I make? Or maybe what things can I keep because they worked really well? I also do encourage you to infuse SRL skills just very slowly and at a pace that makes sense for you. As you were listening today, you very likely thought to yourself, oh, I already do that. I might not have named it an SRL skill, but I do already do that. There might be other things too that you heard that you thought, oh, I could really, really quickly incorporate that. And I do encourage you to go about it at a pace that makes sense to you. Use the iterative process, see how it goes, keep it, change it, continue to iterate.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.